This is Duke University.
Welcome to the Duke event. My name is Sterling Wilder. I'm a member of the class of 1983 and the Director of Alumni Affairs. There are some 83s in the audience, of course. They're everywhere. And we're delighted to be here in Seattle, and everyone is apologizing for your weather, but that's all right, because we're still here with you. And of course, it was beautiful in San Francisco yesterday and today, but yeah, delighted to be here with you. Sorry. And yesterday I saw a parade with naked men, but we didn't have that here today, but it's okay. Sorry. Well, I won't tell you more, but you can ask me after that. On to our program. So again, we're delighted to be here in Seattle. I'm particularly delighted to have President Broadhead here with us, as well as Dr. Mike Merson, who is Director of Duke's Global Health Institute. Also, we have Mrs. Broadhead here with us, which is terrific. Cindy Broadhead as well. We're glad to have her. And there are also other staff members from Duke here, and I hope that you'll have a chance to visit with them after the program if you didn't have a chance before. The purpose of tonight's event, called the Duke Idea, is to bring, it's a little bit of a different spin on our traditional alumni event, and our purpose is to bring the intellectual excitement of Duke directly to you, our alumni and parents. And we want you to be able to hear firsthand from deans and senior administrators and faculty members about the new and innovative and exciting programs that are happening on campus and their numerous successes. And so, I told you that, but then I also haven't told you all the different places that we've been. Some people call it a road show. It's only a road show when you do it 2 nights in a row. Is that right? So we are a little bit of a road show, because again, last night we were in San Francisco. But we actually started the Duke Idea event in Boston with Dean Blair Shepard, who is Dean of the Fuqua School of Business. And then in January, that's an exciting crowd tonight. In January, we were in Dallas with Sandy Williams, who's Vice Chancellor for the medical school, medical center and health system, and also directs our international efforts. And then in February, good timing, we were in Fort Lauderdale with, good timing for the weather, that is, we were with Victor Zhao, and he of course is Chancellor of the health system. And then we were, a few weeks ago, we were in New York, and a little bit of a different spin is we brought in some alums. We brought in Judy Woodruff, class of 68, and John Harwood, class of 78, obviously both very influential and involved in the media. And they had a really interesting discussion on the new forms of media and how they impact on politics and voting. And then again, now we're delighted to have, again, Dr. Mike Merson with us, as I said, Director of Duke's Global Health Institute, and there's information on him and his background in your program, as well as President Broadhead, and President Broadhead will also introduce him briefly tonight. Also, we will be going from here, we'll be going home, not to Detroit, where we hope we were on our way to. But we will be going to Nashville in April with Greg Jones, who's Dean of the Divinity School, and May will be in Chicago with David Levy, who's Dean of the Law School, and then we'll end up our tour, which we can now call a world tour, because we'll be in London with Blair Shepard, who is again, the Dean of the Fuqua School of Business. Before I move on to the program, I did want to recognize a couple of people who were here with us this evening. A couple of you are alums. First, we have Trustee Emeritus Dottie Simpson is with us. Delighted to have her. Have to hold your applause. We have a few special people here. Jim Ladd and Michelle Sales, both former presidents of the Alumni Association as well, and a current alumni board member, Ann Lawler, who is here. And also, that's a lot. You know, Seattle, that's a lot of people. Also, I wanted to tell you, and I know many of you know this, and we are going to get to the program, I promise, but this is pretty neat, is about 2 years ago, Eric Malin, the then recently appointed director of the Duke Engage program, came to the Alumni Association and said to us, we want to start a Duke Engage program, a domestic program, from the ground up. And we need a city that can help us, that can provide some alums and some support and really help this program get off the ground. And we thought about it for about 5 seconds, and then we said Seattle. And they said, great. And so we contacted some folks in Seattle, and we had an enthusiastic response. And many of the people who planned that first summer, which now will be summer 2, are in the audience. And I'd love if they could just raise their hands or stand up. So thank you. Hi. Now let's talk to all of our So again, back to tonight. So the Duke Idea will be a conversation about, and so tonight, as we said, that tonight will be on Duke's Global Health institute, and also the impact that it's having not only on campus but around the world. And obviously, as evidence from the recent economic crisis, the world is getting smaller, and the challenges we face in the environment, and security, economy, and health rise across all borders, and they must be solved across borders. And given this new reality, we thought tonight would be really a perfect setting to sort of have that discussion so you can hear what Duke is really doing about this, and it's a lot. And it's absolutely astounding and amazing, and it was so interesting last night, and I know it will be as well tonight. And so you will hear a conversation between President Broadhead and Dr. Merson on the importance of global health and what Duke is really doing, not only to work with the students, but also to train the health practitioners who will deliver it. And you'll gain some insight, we know, into the challenges of solving these complex global health problems and the innovative work that's being done at Duke. And it's awesome. You'll be so proud. And you'll learn a lot, so it's good. So I know you'll have a lot of comments. We had questions for our guests afterwards, and we will take a few from the audience, but also President Broadhead and Dr. Merson will be able to stay after as well, and be able to have conversation. And again, we will return to the reception, and which will be back on. It won't just be dessert, we'll have the whole thing. So if you feel cheated, you didn't get enough, it'll be there at the end. And as I told Jim Ladd earlier, turn off the Blackberries, because if we're this close to the stage, they will interact. I promise, I guarantee it. It has happened before. Also, too, I talked a little bit about the strong leadership that Duke has always had in Seattle, but make sure you know there are over 1,800 alums and parents in the Seattle area, and that's 14th in terms of the alumni groups around the world, which is good. I asked George, who's supposed to know this, and he thought you were 20th, so he's really moved up in the last little bit. And so, and particularly in Seattle, in terms of the percentage of the people who are involved is absolutely amazing and so important for Duke. We have a AAAC chair here. We have 30 or so people who volunteer to interview students. I know a lot of you read your Duke magazines. Many of you sit on Duke boards. Many of you are chairing your reunions. You come back to campus. You organize events here. All of these are such critical points of engagement, and they really do make a difference. And so we want to say thank you for that. And we also want to hear more from you about how we can help you engage. We have many goals and jobs at the Alumni Association, and three critical ones that we're particularly focusing on this year, but are always important to us, are to make sure that you sustain your engagement, particularly when you're so far physically away from campus, and that we provide terrific opportunities and allow you to do that. So it's not just about game watching, which is fun, and it's not just about Duke Engage, which is so important, and it's not just about alumni interviewing, it's all of it. It's the things that appeal across the board and at different times in your lives. And so do let us know if we can ever be of assistance or you have ideas for us. So all that's over. You're tired of hearing from me, and now my job is to introduce President Broadhead. And is one of our first very special guests this evening. And as you know, he became Duke's 9th president in 2004. And President Broadhead has ushered in a new era of expansion, investment, and altruism at Duke. From the creation of the Duke Global Health Institute and the successful completion of the financial aid initiative just a few months ago, to the launch of our civic service project, of course, Duke Engage, which he'll speak about more. President Broadhead has been a true leader for our university, and it is my pleasure to turn the podium and your attention over to a terrific man, a great Dukey, and our president.
Thanks so much, and thanks for being here. It is a great, great pleasure to be in Seattle, only mitigated by the fact that I'm leaving at about 4 a.m. tomorrow, and I'm trying to figure out how I can manage to stay for the weekend. This is the trouble with my job. The great thing is I get to go everywhere. The trouble is you don't get to stay when you get there. But it is a great pleasure that I get to see the kind of community of thoughtful and involved people who are here tonight. I would say, too, I got to designate the people who I'll bring with me to different cities, and it seemed to me that coming to Seattle, that it would be great to ask Mike Merson, and I was so glad you were pleased, because we recognize that Seattle is one of the very important places in the world in terms of global health, as the home of the Gates Foundation, as the home of the important program at UW. The whole point is about global health is, of all the things that it would be stupid to be competitive about, global health would be at the top of the list. It takes everybody working together, and so we're happy to come and sort of express our solidarity in this place. So here's the format is, I will bring you up to date about everything at Duke in an extremely brief form. Yes. I will briefly introduce my excellent colleague and friend, and then he and I are going to have a conversation. And that's what it will really be. I'll ask him questions such as you might ask him, and we'll talk a little, and then we'll throw it open to you. And then, as Sterling says, we'll return to the food that awaits. What a beautiful space this is, I would just say too. So I would just start this way. Anybody looking at any university this year in history will probably identify this as the year that was defined by the economic downturn. Of course, it has hit everything in the country and everything in the world, and universities have by no means been exempt from that. I sent you a letter. I know you read all my letters, and I kind of sometimes I thank you for not writing back. You know, one of the great paradoxes of modern times are universities received so much generosity in recent years, and the generosity increased so rapidly in value in the markets of recent years that actually universities at the front ranks, such as Duke, have derived more benefit from their endowment a year like last year by far than you did even 5 years ago. This is great unless there should happen to be an economic downturn, in which case you turn out to be newly vulnerable because you're newly benefited by the endowment. And so we will face the challenge, which I outlined as frankly as I knew how in that letter. We'll face the challenge of significantly reducing the budgetary base of the university and walking ourselves back to the point where we can accommodate our activities on that base. This task has been accepted just as a reality. I think it's been accepted with considerable cheerfulness and the sense that it's a challenge to our ingenuity on campus, and so we don't regard it as a crisis, or at least we might say it's our share of dealing with the general crisis. But Duke will come through just fine. I would say a few things about our situation in these times. The first I'd say is, there are industries you would be very sorry to be in at this moment. I won't look to see if you're nodding your head. But I would say that a great university, and especially a great university with a medical school and a hospital, these are probably pretty good industries to be in nowadays. They're places with lots of jobs, places where the business doesn't turn down, people still need an operation when they need it, and people still need an education when they need it. We have not seen any downturn of the number of people who think that education would be a good thing to get, or a good thing to get for their children. In fact, we saw an upturn of 4,000 applications to undergraduate school in this 1 year alone, and we've seen an almost similar increase in applications to virtually all of our schools. So the thing we're offering is in even greater demand now, and so that's certainly a place to start. The second thing I'd say, and I know that any of you who have been to campus in recent years know this, Duke was the beneficiary of unexpected largesse and plenty in the last many years. I'm glad we were. It was extremely enjoyable. But I would say that Duke did not waste the unexpected resources of that time. We did things with the funding available then that will have long-term benefits for us. So for instance, we built a museum. We not only built a museum, we built a museum of the quality that attracted the El Greco to Velázquez exhibit that was one of the principal art historical events in America that never would have come to Duke before 4 years ago, and it only came because the resources of that time were invested in such an enduring way. We built a giant engineering building that helped us attract faculty that have really jumped us up the ladder of engineering schools. We built a big science research building linking physics, chemistry, and biology that has enabled us to attract a kind of faculty member we never could have had before. I had lunch the day before I left. You know, there's a medal given in honor of Charles Darwin that's only given every 50 years. The person who won it this year is a Duke faculty member, 37 years old, an Egyptian family, born in Australia naturally and raised in Hampton, Virginia, who has done, yes, the world these days, if you know that, who has done the leading work on answering the unobvious questions. We know that there is variation in nature and species produce varieties, and that's how evolution works.
but what is it that stabilizes species at some point or other? What is it that keeps dogs from evolving into all kinds of intermediate life forms and every other thing? So that's a pretty important discovery, and if you get a prize that's only given every 50 years, my hat is off to you. But my hat is also off to the university that built the French Science Center, because we would not have him on our faculty if we hadn't created the resources that he recognized would be fertile condition for his work. Of all the things we've done, I think the most important, certainly to me, of these last fat years was the Financial Aid Initiative. We set out early in my presidency to try to raise $300 million in permanent endowment support for financial aid. And at the time we did that, I said many and many a time, we want to do this, we want endowment support so it'll be permanent. So that when the day comes when there's a downturn, the university will have the resources to meet its obligation to offer excellent education to everyone suitably interested and talented to receive it, whatever their parents' income. And everybody laughed and wrote their checks, and that was great. And now we're in the downturn. But the beautiful thing is, we crossed the 300 million mark on about the 31st of October this year, just in time, you might say, so that worked out well. But again, we used this time to create enduring strengths for the university. And so even if we go through a time of testing now, we go through it in a fortified position, which I think is good. And I'll just say one last thing before I turn to Mike, and it's this, which is, well, gee, there's a man in this room, he's sitting right here, who came to Duke in the fall of 1937. Right. And I say to myself, how tall were the trees on the West Campus at the time of you came? You were taller than those trees. And then you were. And that helps to put something useful in mind, it seems to me, which is the Duke secret was never to wait and have a lot of resources and then see what you could do with them. The Duke secret was always to have some idea, just to invent something, to project some ingenuity, and carry the idea out with a kind of opportunism, entrepreneurialism. Someone last night told me the right word was scrappiness. And that's how Duke came into existence. Duke didn't have a large endowment and therefore create a medical school. They had the ridiculous idea to knock down a bunch of trees and create a World Medical Center there. And last year, Duke had the second highest recipients of NIH research funding of any American university. That's what happened when somebody had just an outrageous idea and then made it happen. The Fuqua School of Business is not a famous school that evolved over 150 years. It was started I was an adult when Fuqua was started, and it found ways to get into that market and to bring itself forward. And so I say to myself, that's something we can do at this time too. Necessity is the mother of invention, and that's an especially good situation if you happen to have some invention. And especially if you happen to be a place that accommodates invention, and even you might say rejoices in invention. I look this year, this will be remembered as the year of the economic downturn, but it will also be remembered as the year that we took the Terry Sanford Institute of Public Policy and turned it into a full-fledged school. It's already regarded as one of the 10 best public policy schools in America, and it isn't even a school yet. So just you wait. But if we think how important the public sector will be in all the problems we have in the future, just imagine what a resource that will be. Fuqua has created a new degree program this spring alone, recognizing there will be a lot of people who emerge from liberal arts education who will wish they had some more serious managerial training as they enter the job field, but who aren't yet ready for an MBA. Fuqua has created a one-year master's degree for students straight out of college that will give them that further testing, that further education that will make them compelling job candidates without mixing it with the MBA program, which requires you to have had a lot more experience than most people will have. So these are the kind of new things that are springing up even in the current situation. And on that list, I would put this, which is we take very seriously the notion that the great university of the future won't be the one that has the largest endowment. It'll be the one that has the best ideas about where universities are going and how to get from here to there. And so we see this as a time when we're really trying to bend the shape of education trying to anticipate what the world will want from university graduates, what the world will want in the form of trained intelligence in the future. And we see two things in it. In addition to all the traditional strengths of traditional study, which will never be irrelevant, we think the day is coming when people aren't going to want to be trained in extraordinarily narrow expertises and that be called education. The world we're going to live in is a world in which people are going to have to know how to bring lots of disciplines together to solve problems. We'll be talking in a minute about health, but health is partly a medical research issue, it's a biological issue, but it's also an economic issue, a cultural issue. You can't get those problems right unless you can marry those forms of knowledge, and so that's the kind of program we're in the process of creating. The second thing I'd say is we have lived through a century where a great deal of the most prestigious form of education took the form of an extreme isolation of academic study from the experience and inputs of the so-called real world. Academics, of course, believe that theirs is the real world. And I have lived my life thinking so too. Nevertheless, we come to a time where it's very clear to us that it helps students take their classroom work more seriously if they sometimes step out of the classroom and see what all this was equipping you to do in the world. And so when we had our students in the program Engineers Without Borders, they took all these engineering classes, but then when you say, all right, here are the specifications of a project in Uganda, a place that lacks access to clean water, can you go create something there that would give them that, that power that would be accomplished without any resources that aren't available there and can be repaired by people who will be there after you come home. So you had students go there, several. I spent this morning with one who was on the trip. When they went, they learned why they learned all that engineering, because there they were out engineering things, and they also learned what they didn't know yet. They learned what they now needed to come back to school to learn. So it connects knowledge and service, but it also helps make the whole project of education more profoundly real. I think for us, our signature program in that regard is this program, Duke Engage. We'll have 400 undergraduates at Duke's expense working around the world this summer and across this country in the fields of education, environment, energy, health, taking their knowledge out to a place where they can put it to service and learn what that knowledge was good for, and then come back to see what more they need to learn. And my hat is especially off in Seattle to the fact, why did we look to Seattle as a city to pioneer a partnership with Duke and a city around Duke Engage? This is a city that's famous for its civic culture, for its sense of the things that people need to do together to support the quality of life that individuals want to enjoy. So it was the perfect place. And I do thank you all for your support of that program. And I suppose it would be ungrateful not to note that one Seattle Dookie had an even further role. All of you can share this role if you wish, which is Belinda Gates, who made a large gift. It's one of the two that endowed that program and helped make it the kind of signature it is. I'm going to turn and introduce Mike Merson now, and maybe when I finish my introduction, I'll look around and find that he is now in his chair over here. Extremely unobtrusive. So here's, you got some details about Mike Merson, but I'll just introduce him my way. This is a person whose name is known to everyone in the field of global health around the world. He is the global Mike Merson, I could say. He went to Merson. He played varsity basketball. He bragged to me of this. He hoped I would bring him to the attention of Mike Krzyzewski, and I actually did on 2 occasions, but I have not yet struck the spark of interest that you are hoping. I told him, isn't it true you played basketball in the Maccabean games? I even told him that, but even that, I think he thought, Mike Merson, Gerald Henderson, so we're still working on that. He went to Merson. After that, he went to medical school at Downstate, then did his internship and residency at Johns Hopkins, and then he launched on a career that has taken him around the world into many institutional settings in service of global health. He was the head of the cholera study project in Bangladesh in his early career. He came back and worked at, I'm just listing sample things, at the World Health Organization, where he was in charge of their anti-diarrheal efforts around the world. And then he worked at the WHO when an unfamiliar disease came to the attention of that organization, namely HIV/AIDS. And you had, it's an amazing thing for someone to have in their biography that your expertise and commitments put you in the position to be in the place to really try to mastermind the world effort, the first world responses to that famous scourge. Thereafter, he came to Yale, where I first knew him, where he was the Dean of Epidemiology and Public Health. And then, after I became president of Duke, we had the idea to create a global health program. We put together a search committee made up of people from business, engineering, nursing school, the divinity school, all over the place, and their unanimous choice to head this program, to found it, if we could get him, was Mike Merson. You can see why he has a world of experience. He's worked everywhere. He's worked on every disease. He's worked with almost everybody. But in addition to that, and his knowledge base, I mean, ask him, and it's ludicrous. If, you know, like sometimes I have this like stump Mike desire. Can I think of a question he doesn't know the answer to? I have not yet found it, but it's a lifelong dream of mine. The thing about Mike is, in addition to his extraordinary knowledge, he just has the most remarkable skills as a connector. When I went to India for the first time on Duke's behalf this fall, well, everyone knew Mike Merson. Not everyone knew Duke, but everyone knew Mike Merson because he had just been there advising on the creation of a system of public health education. At Duke, he has been a welcome colleague and collaborator across the university. You've got people to want to do things you could never have made them do if they had to do them. You've got education programs, you've got residencies in place in global health, you have a master's degree in public health that you've created, you have a track for undergraduates, you have a freshman program. It really has become one of the magnets and intellectual signatures of our university, thanks to many people, but to you as the catalyst of the efforts of many people. I would say just last before I sit down, Mike also understands, and that's one of the things I love about him, that the issue of global health partly involves linking experts together around the world, but it partly involves reaching back to the aspiring and talented young who don't know yet how to spend their life and get clues from you about careers they could make for themselves. I mentioned Mike Krzyzewski, but now I'll mention women's basketball. I know a person, everyone at Duke knew her, named Emily Weiner, one of the stars of our women's basketball team year before last. Of course she was pre-med, and of course, therefore, she was interested in working somewhere in the world, and she thought she wanted to work in Africa, but then she went and talked to Mike Merson, who told her that the specific kind of issues she wanted to work on would be best done in Guatemala, and you linked her up with a program, and the next thing I knew, I'm getting emails, such as the modern world, from a women's basketball star working in the highlands of Guatemala, trying to persuade people, specifically women, to do away with wood-burning stoves in unventilated houses, a course of massive pulmonary problems, and create a more environmentally safe and therefore healthy system for cooking and heating in their homes. But to reach back that way and put your knowledge at the service of students that way, I think is just, for me, the greatest asset you can have together with others. So if you would be so kind, I would ask you to join me in welcoming Mike Merson.
And now we'll have a little conversation. Okay? Can I see people over here? I can see everybody but Josh Baum. I see you. Pretty good.
Sure.
Sneak my way forward. Can we sneak forward a little bit?
Great.
Okay.
I like your
That's the general
looks
idea.
like a developing country where you
You told me we were going to have a conversation in the jungle. This is not exactly a jungle. This is just a, come on.
I like the office.
Yeah, I think we probably did the jungles more generally than this one. I know the answer to some of these questions, but I'm going to ask you questions you don't know I'm going to ask you, and that I haven't even written up yet. But let me start with an obvious one. When you first wanted to be a doctor,
who knows what kind you wanted to be, and I'm going to guess your mother hoped you might be the kind of doctor who had a nice office somewhere, right?
Dr. Kildare.
Dr. Kildare, right. Instead you became Dr. Mike Merson. How did it happen that your ambitions took the specific form that led into this global health eventually?
It's an interesting question. It happened the way it happens with students today. You meet a professor or you have an opportunity to do something. You don't know what's going to happen when it happens. In my case, well, when I went to college, if I went to New York, that was a big deal. Today, when I meet the freshmen, half of them have already been overseas. But in those days, going to New York, you were happy. But it was in medical school that my professor of obstetric and gynecology asked me if I wanted to spend the summer in Nepal. He was an advisor to USAID and working in family planning over there. So I said, sure, why not? So I went to Nepal, and he told me I'd primarily be working with the Family Planning Association. They're doing surveys of women to see what their reproductive needs were. He didn't tell me that a week after I was there, I would be put into a helicopter and taken way up into the Himalayas to do vasectomies on Gurkha soldiers. And he also didn't tell me that they didn't use anesthesia. So that was my first experience in global health. Then
what was your second experience?
I went to medical school. I did my internship and residency at Hopkins in the chair of medicine. I asked him if I could take off for 3 months and go back overseas. Mac Harvey, a very famous professor of medicine. And he said, sure, find an experience that will really be something different than what you have here. And so I got an opportunity to work on the Hope ship, SS Hope. They don't have a ship anymore. It used to be a ship that went around the world. And I actually was there for 3 months in northeast Brazil. Learned Portuguese as best I could and ran the medical ward. And at that time, northeast Brazil, Natal, some of you may know it's the most eastern part of Brazil. We had a military base there during the Second World War, actually. And that was an amazing experience for me because I saw tropical medicine and I saw poverty even more in some ways than I saw in Brazil. That was a very moving experience because I was then a little bit more medically trained and could do more. But both those experiences made me realize the great health disparities in the world and made me realize that there were many things you could do better and to save many lives and to make many people healthier. And then Vietnam was happening then, and like many physicians, we were drafted. And I was fortunate in some ways. I went to the Center for Disease Control. And there I had some interesting experiences. I was put in the diarrheal diseases branch, and I had some unique experiences there overseas. One was I investigated the cause of travelers' diarrhea in Mexico City. Now you may wonder why Mexico City, because at that time it was called Montezuma's Revenge, and about 60 to 70% of people got diarrhea if they went to Mexico City for a week. There were all kinds of thoughts. Maybe it was the sun, the water, the heat. I mean, there were all kinds of theories. So what I did is I followed 250 gastroenterologists. You'd think, you know, they would take care of themselves. Well, 60% got sick. And we collected their stools and found out it was enterotoxigenic E. coli. That really broke open the cause of travelers' diarrhea. That was a very interesting experience. And then I went to Guam because there was cholera for the first time on American soil. And had a chance to investigate Guam and 13 fishermen. It turned out it was the fish they had, raw fish they had eaten that had been caught off the coast from a ship that had been dumping sewage and water. And I mean, that was a fascinating experience. But then about 8 months later, I was eating at a restaurant in Atlanta where CDC is. And somehow the director of CDC found me. I still don't know how to this day. And I got a call to come to his office at 10 o'clock at night, and he handed me a ticket, air ticket, and he said, "You're going back to Guam." And I said, "Oh, no." And he said, "Yeah, and you're going to be there for a while because you're going to be in charge of the evacuation of 250,000 Vietnamese refugees that were coming, and those of you who know the story at the end of the war, they all came to Guam to be screened. And I asked him, what do I know about that? And he said, well, you know Guam, that's enough. And so there I was back on Guam, heading up a very challenging mission, had all kinds of challenging experiences dealing with the military. And some of the military, of course, were not very happy at the end of the war. You may know Jimmy Merson and the Doors, you know, that famous rock group. Well, it turned out that his father, Admiral Merson, was in charge of this, and he was the one person that really was very receptive and helped bring these refugees to the States, and they've done very well. I mean, I remember, I've met some of these people that were in the camp. So that's how I got into global health, and I think if I were to summarize, I then went to WHO, and you heard some of that, and ran some global programs, and then went to Yale. But for me, it was those early field experiences. It's what I tell students, and it changed my life and made me understand how much we could do by helping others.
Well, I mean, I love your story because when I look at incoming students, you can pick any one of them and realize none of us know what's going to happen to you, least of all you. Because one thing leads to another, and look at the things your life has led you into, and continues to for that matter. I'm interested in asking you the question, you've worked in clinics, you've worked in government, you've worked in NGOs, all kinds of things. What was for you the pull that made you at a certain point think that an academic base would be the right place to do the kind of work you do?
So after all these field experiences and working in the UN bureaucracy, although for me it was quite a wonderful experience running these 3 programs, global programs, I had to make a decision what I was going to do. I had actually been abroad. Well, I worked for WHO, as you heard, but I really worked on Swiss Air. 16B was my home. And I had a chance to visit about 140 countries during those days. So I felt, here I was, I had done a lot of things, and was I going to stay overseas and continue to work at WHO? But no, I had this real desire to come back and to give back and to help build the next generation of global health leaders. There were a bunch of us. King Holmes, who's the leader here in Seattle, is another person like that. There were 10 or 15 of us that one way or the other had overseas experiences, and felt that would it be great to come back, and what a better place to do it than working with at a university where you have the future leaders, where you can do some exciting research, get involved in interesting policy issues, so for me, it was time to come home, and Yale gave me a chance to be a public health dean, and actually with Dick, we managed to build global health up there a little bit.
A little bit.
Only a little bit, but of course it was the opportunity to come to Duke, and
Well, that's my next question. You're leaving ahead. Well, which is really, lots of different places. You need a bunch of different ingredients. But I'm thinking like wines have this flavor of the terroir, right? The particular local cast of the land that it takes up into it. What does Duke have as the sort of underlying support for global health? You're a person who, well, that's the choice you make.
Well, you said it before in many ways, and I think many of you know it because you've all been to Duke. If I were to sum it up, I'd say that there's no global health problem that doesn't require an interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary approach. Take bed nets for malaria. You think you just give out bed nets and it'll prevent malaria? Well, it's not that simple. You need to design the net, you need an engineer, you need to put some pesticide on it, so you need to be environmentally, make it a good environmental product. You need to get it out to the health system, so you need to worry about the management of the health system. And that health system is going to be in the private sector, the public sector. In Africa, a lot of that is going to be working with faith-based organizations, so you need to work with a divinity school that knows those organizations. You mentioned earlier you need to understand the population. Will they sleep under a bed net? Will they not sleep under a bed net? And you need anthropologists to help you with that. You need economists to tell you, should you charge for the bed net or should you not charge for the bed net? Because sometimes if you charge, you get better usage than if you don't charge. So that's just one example, but there isn't, I can take many, many problems in global health, many solutions in global health, and they require an interdisciplinary approach. And there's no, as I came to know Duke, it's what they tell you when you come to look for a job there. They say there's no place so interdisciplinary that people there aren't big silos, and it's a place where people really work together, where the deans all work together, and my God, it's true. And therefore, it's a perfect place to do global health. And the way you set the Institute up, we're one of 7 signature institutes at Duke, which are under the provost or under the chancellor. In our case, I'm half owned by the provost and half owned by the chancellor. So that covers all the schools at Duke. And there was a committee, as you heard, that met for quite a while. So when I arrived, it was such a warm welcome from the deans. We're here, we want to work with you. And a lot of what we do at Duke, yeah, we have some offices and we have staff, but a lot of what we do goes on in the schools. And we want everyone to own us, and we want to be part of all the schools, including Duke Engage. Many of the students that go abroad at Duke Engage are going to do a global health project. So what we've created, which you've helped us create, of course you gave resources, which was nice, to start the Institute.
That was that.
You know, you're still helping. Was the fact that, I mean, to me, if there was any university that could show what a university could do in global health, with its interdisciplinary approach, plus the service for society ethos, the strategic plan of making a difference, all of that is global health. And it just was a wonderful, wonderful opportunity for me. And so I came to Duke, and it's proved out to be just that.
Well, and since you came, it's like you've been there forever. I mean, it is really amazing that you do also bring wonderful skills of getting people to want to cooperate and wanting to work together to accomplish goals, which is wonderful. Let me ask you another question. Let's think back. I won't pick any particular date in the past, but let's say we were to go back 25 years or something like that. So you were there, a person standing at a place of expertise, looking around the world then, the way you would have read the sort of health picture or health challenges of the world then, and how that would be different from the way you would read it nowadays.
Well, of course, I think what changed, well, I think what's really changed, I think back then we talked of developed and developing countries. We had 2 categories of countries, and we thought it was all that simple. It's not that simple anymore by any means. I mean, we have the rich countries, the OECD countries, the developed countries, although we have pockets of poverty in our own countries. We can't forget that, and global health includes local health. I can come back to that later. But really, but what's happened over the last 25 years is the so-called developing countries have really gone into 2 paths. You have the sadness, in some ways, the poor countries of sub-Saharan Africa, in particular, where in fact mortality, average lifespan is still quite low. The AIDS pandemic, rampant in Africa. It's tuberculosis, malaria. A million people die, a million children getting infected with malaria every year. 9 million people with tuberculosis, an AIDS pandemic, with 30–40% of the population infected in some African countries. But then you have the vast majority of the other countries, the China, the India, the Indonesia, the Mexico, the Brazil, the Russia, these middle-income countries that have rapidly globalized. And many of them have faced the incredible challenge of having rich populations and getting all the rich diseases, chronic diseases, hypertension, diabetes. In fact, India's got the highest rate of diabetes in the world. I've just come back from China. 20% of Chinese men are hypertensive. And many of them have strokes in their full 50s, for reasons we're not quite clear, rather than heart attacks. But they also have serious pockets still of poverty, particularly in rural areas. So they still have a lot of childhood diarrhea, maternal mortality, and all the problems that you see in Africa. So I think the way the world has gone is unfortunately wider disparities. And in fact, you might be surprised, but if you take a country like, we always used to say that, unfortunately, the United States had the greatest gap between the rich and the poor in terms of health. Well, China's probably second now. Having just been to China and seeing all the data, tremendous health disparities now occurring in China. Where you have Shanghai, and you have even Beijing, and you have the major cities with economic growth, but then you go to the rural areas with terrible problems. So the world is sort of, unfortunately, bifurcated a little bit in terms of the way it's gone. And no one predicted the AIDS pandemic, that's for sure. And no one predicted SARS, and no one predicted avian flu. And I think no one predicted that global health would become a real security issue. I mean, viruses don't need passports, and we've had 40 emerging new diseases in the past 50 years. 2/3 of them are viral, 2/3 of them come from animals and mutate to human strains. So I think the world of global health has both changed in terms of the diseases, but it's also changed into the context in which it's viewed. And to make one other point, it's also become politically important. There's a field now called global health diplomacy, and you may say, well, if I asked all of us, so what's the part of the world where the U.S. is most popular today? Well, let's say pre-President Obama. And you might guess numerous things, but you might not guess sub-Saharan Africa. And that's because of President Bush's PEPFAR program, for the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, which was announced in 2003, which has put 2 million Africans who were dying of AIDS on antiretroviral drugs. You know, we've done that as a nation. And that's really a great example of how health can be a tremendous tool for diplomacy. And those things probably wouldn't have been predicted 25 years ago, I don't think.
Well, every time I sit with you, I learn things, and especially these cultural dimensions. When you talk about, are people willing to sleep under bed nets? And of course, when you and I were in India, we met somebody who was developing an extraordinarily low-cost hospital system. But when I talked to him, he told me one of the troubles is they have air conditioning, but the people in these areas have never experienced it, and therefore they're profoundly disturbed by air conditioning and don't want to go to the hospital.
Right.
So, of course, there's just ever so many dimensions. And then I think the main thing I've learned from you is that we live in a world, paradoxically, in which the diseases of prosperity have grown at astonishing rates, while the diseases of poverty have continued in place, sometimes in the same country. So now I asked you to step back 25 years. So now I'll ask you to step forward 25 years.
Wow. Okay.
You should be able to do it.
Sure. And say what? What do I think the world's problems will be?
Just what's your sense? You know, there's the things we look back at. There's things we've seen emerging. Do you have guesses about things that people nowadays are you know, we see the beginning of the evidence of it, but we're not really taking seriously what the reality is things will turn
Right. I think the first thing we're going to see is a much older planet, a grayer planet, and all the challenges that that's going to bring on us. I actually read a piece in the Financial Times today that one of the problems in coming out of our economic situation over the next 10 years is how much, even in Europe and in the US, how many people will be on pensions versus how many people will be working, and all the challenges that's going to create economically. But from a health standpoint, if you think about the aging, how fast, think of all the issues you've dealt with your families, think with your parents. Think of the challenge of dealing in this country with elderly parents. Now magnify that to 1.6 billion Chinese and 1 billion Indians. And think about the fact that in a country like China, the lifespan has gone from 45 to 75 in a period of about 50 years. And think of the crisis there of dealing with
and of course the number of children going down.
Yeah, and the number of children going down, exactly. And think of that. Think of Alzheimer's. Think of falls, all the consequences of falls. Think of just the chronic disease management that's required in the elderly. So I think one of our greatest challenges as a planet is going to be dealing with the graying of the population. And as we've talked, around the year 2015, there are going to be more people alive on the planet over 65 than there are less than 5. And the fastest growing age group, I'm happy to say, it's good for some of us in the room, are those in the 60s. Our lifespan is becoming greater. If you live to 60 now, you have a very good chance of living into your 80s. So that's one big change I see. Another thing I'm worried about that I see approaching quickly is the environment. I tell the students that in my generation, when I think back to what we could have done better, it's dealing with the AIDS pandemic. We did a terrible job of dealing with the AIDS pandemic. didn't need to have so many millions of people dying, so many millions of people infected. We'll talk about why that happened. But so what I tell the students is, what's on your head is the environment. Because if we don't get serious about the environment, we're going to be in big trouble. The health consequences of the environment are huge. The most serious is that we have too much water in some places and not enough water in others. And some of you may know we have diseases occurring now where we've never had them before. Let's take dengue fever. People worry about malaria. Sure, malaria can kill, but dengue can kill too. And dengue is rampant. Why? Because the Aedes mosquito that carries that virus, it can now survive in higher temperatures, in more places. And it loves to have warm temperatures. It multiplies better in the mosquito. And you get more rain, you get more mosquitoes. So for all of those reasons, I'm very concerned about climate and the environment. And I think that is going to shape a lot of our health issues. Particularly, you mentioned the student that went to Guatemala. Indoor air pollution is a huge problem. Outdoor air pollution. You all saw from the Olympics what happened in Beijing when they finally went to every other day cars. Can you imagine if we all did that? If you had an even plate, you would drive on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And if you had an odd plate, you would drive on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. Everybody could drive on Sundays. That's how they cured the pollution problem for the Olympics. But is that something we'd all be willing to do? I don't know. But there's a big cloud over China that moves across with pollution. So I think those are the two things that come to mind. And the third thing I'm concerned about is the economic situation. And maybe that's more for the next 10 years and the next 25 years. But we know that when there's economic downturn, we've seen in other depressions over the past 20 years, it's the poor that suffer. And my fear is that we're going to continue to have a wide gap between the rich and the poor in our own country, around the world, in terms of health. That we haven't really learned yet how to organize healthcare, and we haven't learned in innovative enough ways. I think the Indians, as you mentioned, have some very interesting ideas on how to organize their health system using innovative technologies. But I think one of the things we're going to have to really deal with over the next 25 years is this widening gap in health disparities. You may know already that there's a projected 90 million more people that are going to go into poverty in the next 12 months as a result of the current situation, mostly in Africa. And they're mostly going to be women and children. And governments are not going to be able to take care of them. And they're not going to have the funds to take care of them. And aid is going to come down dramatically. We're seeing it already. I mean, we'll see what comes out of the G20. There's a move in the G20 to get a pledge at least not to let Africa be neglected right now. Because when you have poverty and you have seeds of discontent, it's a security risk militarily, but it's also a security risk because you don't have surveillance systems to pick up new viruses, new tuberculosis organisms that are multi-resistant. And I really would not like to have the U.S. blamed for the world getting poorer. We've already been blamed for the economic recession. So these are the three things that come to mind in dealing with the future.
Okay, I guess I could try to end this on a cheerful note. But I don't know if I'll succeed, because here's what I really want to ask you is, here we sit at Duke, and Duke's a big university. It's not a huge university, but we have, what, 12,000 students and large faculty across all the university. But then when you take that, and then you visualize that against a world with 9 billion people in it, and all its challenges, the challenges of newborns, the challenges of all the people who are now going to live to much older ages than they had before, the challenges of people who have every known disease, the challenges of people who will now have unknown diseases, and all of this potentially aggravated by economic circumstances. I guess the question I'm wondering is, what can a university realistically do?
Right. Well, I think it's a great follow-on because I think Duke is going to have a lot. We already have a Paul Farmer, just as one example. But I think we're going to have a lot of our graduates are going to change the world and make it healthier. And I think I'm really excited about working. We have, in the 2 years I've been there, in a little over 2.5 years now, we have developed 14 educational programs around global health. As the President said, from undergraduate to medical school to master's program, postdoctoral program, international programs, global semester abroad. We're going to have started global semester abroad where students don't go to, undergraduates don't go to one country, they go to 2 countries. They spend half a semester in China, half a semester in India, take 2 courses in each place, change countries, and then talk about what they've seen. We're going to have undergraduates have that experience. So I think I truly believe, and it's not just our institute, it's Duke University that's going, I think, to have the next leaders in global health in terms of our educational programs. I hope we're preparing them to think out of the box, to be innovative, and to meet up to the kind of challenges they're going to face. I also hope and I believe we're going to be training some great researchers. We have started a number of research initiatives on HIV. In India and in Africa, we're doing work on obesity, not just in China, but also in Durham, where obesity is a real challenge. You may know that there was a study last year that showed that there were now some counties, particularly in the South, where the lifespan was getting shorter, and in our own country. And the reason was twofold: obesity, diabetes, and lung cancer from smoking. So we have projects that address these issues in Durham as well. We have a research initiative on the environment. We have a research initiative on aging. We have a research initiative on gender as well. Some of you may have seen the article in the New York Times about, I guess 3 weeks ago now, where one of our faculty in obstetrics and gynecology working in Tanzania on fistula in women. This is a very sad thing that occurs in women when they have trouble delivering their baby, and their vagina gets ruptured and they create a fistula between the urinary tract and the vaginal tract, and they become ostracized. The stigma is huge. This is a big problem in Africa, and we're trying to do research on how we can prevent this and how we can deal with the stigma that comes with it. So we have such a wide-ranging research initiatives. And what we're thinking about at the Institute are not just the research problems of today, but what are some of the really critical, cutting-edge questions that we need to think about now to deal with the future problems that I've already mentioned are going to occur. And then I guess the other thing I would add that I think we're giving at Duke is we're bringing the experience from the field that so many of our students have into the classroom, and talking about what did you learn, what did you see, what were the ethics of what you saw, what were the cultural dimensions of what you saw, not just having an experience for experience sake. And we have a university that's really behind this. I can't tell you the enjoyment it is working with all the deans and our health system. And just one little story about the health system, which I like to tell because it's so unique. But many health systems, in fact, last night I heard this at UCSF, many health systems have a surplus of equipment. And what they do is they throw it out because they replace a new respirator with they take a respirator that's in pretty good shape and they have a newer version, so they bring that in, or a new piece of operating equipment for operating for surgery. But what Duke did, what the health system's done, is they've given the surplus equipment to our institute. And we give it to our faculty, so that when they go abroad and do their work, they can bring this with them to work with our partners. Of course, we have about 8 or 10 places in the world where we try to concentrate a lot of our efforts. We call them global health sites. And what a wonderful thing to be able to say on behalf of Duke that we're going to bring this equipment, whatever it is, to help you do better on what you're going to do. And this is a great contribution from the health system that I haven't seen anyone else do. Just to give you one example, one of our neurosurgeons took about 6 tons of equipment to Uganda and has set up already in East Africa a training program in neurosurgery and orthopedic surgery. Auto accidents are, when I get into one of the greatest risks in traveling is getting into a car, particularly at night. But auto accidents are a huge problem, and head trauma is the major consequence of that. And one of the exciting things is we've been able to, in Malago Hospital in Kampala, we've been able to, in 2 years with this equipment and our neurosurgeon took 30 volunteers from the health system last year, nurses aides, gave up a week holiday to go with him to Uganda. And surgeons done a lot more surgery and created this training program now for 5 countries in East Africa. And let me tell you, that really matters to students when they see that think the exciting thing about global health is, for the students, is they come. David Brooks, who's a Duke graduate, he had a column recently which talked about, at the time, the unconsummated desire for service and sacrifice that our students have today. It makes me think of the 60s, if I can say that. That's what we see in today's students. And what's so exciting is that the faculty also have gotten the bug a little bit from the students. I think the students have been ahead of the faculty around the United States, not just at Duke. I've seen that in campus after campus. And I think we also, I think the technology, you know, your students have instruments, I don't even know what they are, but different kind of books, Facebooks, and different things that they have.
He's so cool.
So they're always seeing the world all the time, and they have Oprah talking about her work in South Africa, and they have George Clooney talking about his work in Sudan, and so that, you know, and they have, of course, Bono, who loves to sing and helps in global health. And so I think it's a whole new world, and I'm very optimistic. There'll be great challenges, but a university like Duke is going to produce the leadership, many leaders in the world that they're going to make us a healthier planet.
Well, maybe at this point I'll turn and ask you for some questions, but I'll just say one thing along the way, which is you get the concept of an aspiration for the university when you listen to something like Mike, because you realize it really is about research. It's about people pushing the frontiers of knowledge, and it really is about education, because everything we talk about is about how we link knowledge to the new rising people in hopes that they'll form aspirations on the basis of that knowledge. And it really is about service, but it's about some whole that's made up by putting all these parts together.
Right.
And to have that at the center of the university strikes me as a pretty good thing.
And let me just tell one quick story just to emphasize.
That was supposed to be my exit.
I know. But I want to say the business school has started a new cross-continent MBA.
That's right.
In Delhi, in China, in Russia, in St. Petersburg, Dubai, and in all those places, we're building global health programs.
That's right.
So it's not like we act independently; we do it together.
That's right. That's exactly. Well, thanks so much, Mike.
Sure.
Thank you. Can we take some questions? We have, the lighting gives us very limited visibility beyond about the third row.
You have to really
so if we're not calling on you, we're not being rude. I think I see a hand.
So you mentioned the 20 in 25 years, or 10 to 25 years, some of the kind of challenges that we'd be facing. So can you foresee some of the things that are maybe happening now that will bring about, you know, beyond Duke, I guess, that will bring about some good things in the future in 10 or 25 years?
Sure. I think that I have to feel that we're going to make progress when we can eliminate it. We've eliminated smallpox. I'd like to think, I mean, many young people today have never had a smallpox vaccination. I'd like to think we can eliminate polio, maybe measles to some extent. I don't know about completely eliminating measles. But I think we can make real progress with our childhood illnesses, both through immunization and through treatment of pneumonia, treatment of diarrhea. I think we can greatly reduce the tremendous pediatric burden right now of ill health. I'd like to think we can do something about maternal mortality. You know, you may not know, but every minute a mother dies from complication of pregnancy or in childbirth. And I have to feel that, I mean, a lot of that is because programs on maternal health haven't been supported in the last 8 years, including by our own government. Our government was not willing to provide support to UN agencies and other programs because there was this concern about abortion. But I think that's going to change. I think President Obama has made it clear that one of his priorities is going to be maternal health. And I'm very optimistic that if we use the tools that we have, we can dramatically improve women's lifespan in many countries and dramatically reduce maternal mortality. I'd like to think the AIDS pandemic will be under reasonable control within 20 years, either through drugs or through a vaccine. And you know, we've seen the epidemic peak in many parts of the world. It's not in Southern Africa. In gay men, it's not yet peaked, but in this country and in many other countries. But I do think that I'm optimistic that AIDS will peak in most of the world and hopefully be on the way down. I think I'd like to think malaria. I mean, I hesitate because we tried this in the 50s with malaria. But if a combination of bed nets and spray and hopefully a vaccine, we may have had real, and I know the Gates Foundation is putting a lot of support into this. We may have a much less malaria in the world. Where I think the challenges are going to be are in the chronic diseases. I think, you know, in a country like the United States, my father's generation, a lot of men died in their 50s from heart attack and strokes. And I think, you know, then we became a little bit healthier, and we have much less death from heart disease now, premature death. I think that's going to be a real challenge. And one of the things I'm most worried about in that regard is smoking. You know, 1 billion people on the planet are going to die today because of smoking. And that if we can do something about that, we can have a dramatic impact 25 years from now. That's a really critical step. If we could just get people not to smoke or stop smoking, that we can have an enormous impact on disease. So those are some thoughts. I think there's a hand.
If you see one, you can call.
Yeah, right there.
Good. Well, I see one, yeah. Great.
Hi. Hi, my name is Susan, and we have a freshman in the medical school at Duke. And from talking with his classmates, it seems that there are two trends with the young people in medical school today, and that one is specialties as opposed to primary care. And to me, it seems like what the world needs is primary care physicians. And the other thing is that there is some exotic allure about going abroad to help, when in the United States, specifically in North Carolina, but in Seattle and every state, our healthcare is just really dismal for a certain population. And the kid, I mean, it's very exotic to go to Africa, you know, and what does the Global Health Institute, I know you alluded to the fact that it's not just global, it's also local, but how does this get translated to the kids?
Well, okay, I mean, that's a double question, right? I mean, it's a double question. It's how students think and what we do at the Institute. Of course, you so aptly pointed out the problem in this country that a lot, I mean, it's well known that in medicine today, a lot of students go into specialties and not into primary care. And that's a sad result of our health system. It's hard to be in primary care today. And it's hard to make even a decent living. You have to work long hours. Insurance is so many different insurances, and many people don't have insurance. 50 million Americans still don't have insurance. And some have insurance, but it's not enough insurance. So you are absolutely right that one of the greatest challenges we face, and it's on the news all the time, we spend an enormous amount of our economy on healthcare. And Duke, I will say, as a medical center, is very seriously trying to work in Durham. We have a new Duke Center for Community Research in the medical center that is looking at a number of innovative models to improve how we can improve healthcare. But it's got to be healthcare that's effective and not as costly. And of course, there's a big move on through the stimulus package to use medical records. Whether that's, you know, a lot of the money that President Obama is putting into the stimulus plan is to have an electronic medical record. So this is a tremendous problem, and I think that students, I think it's going to take time for the medical profession to, I think, reform along with the health system reform to get students to want to go into primary care. This is a complicated subject, but it's one that the medical profession is aware of, and it's why this administration, in the midst of all this economic crisis, is also trying to deal with healthcare right now. Now, in terms of the Institute, we have a Center for Health Policy, which has about 15 projects in Durham and in North Carolina. Just to touch on, we have a group working in HIV. I mean, a lot of people in North Carolina, unfortunately, it isn't until they get AIDS because they don't trust the healthcare system. Well, if you wait till you get AIDS to come for care, you're coming awfully late. So we're trying to find out ways to remove the stigma and to get the population to feel less stigmatized about HIV and to seek care. We have projects I mentioned in obesity. I'll give you one example. We have a project using churches, 11 churches in Durham, where we're using the churches to get the word out to particularly African Americans on proper diet, which is not easy because it costs money to have a proper diet, but how to cook in a way that will not be as expensive using the churches. We have a new faculty member we've just recruited from Harvard, African American faculty member who's a psychologist who's also doing a study looking at how we can get more exercise done in Durham. What can be done to encourage poorer population to understand the need to exercise, which is so important for diabetes. Another interesting program we have, I don't know if you know about tobacco money, the so-called tobacco money. Well, in North Carolina, a lot of that tobacco settlement money we created a foundation, the Health and Wellness Trust, which is run by the state. And we've just gotten a sizable grant from them to set up a fellowship program at the Institute, where for the next 3 years we're going to bring in at least 5 local health officials to spend a year with us. I mean, they're still in their job, but they take some courses with us, and we help them do their work, and particularly their evaluation. We help them, our faculty are teaching them how to do good program evaluation so they can figure out if what they're doing makes sense. So we're very sensitive to this, and are working in that, with particularly our medical center in that. We have also one other very interesting project that Marilyn Miranda is doing in the environment school using a GIS, an information system, geographic information system, spatial mapping, to look at where the poverty is, the different streets in Durham, and what are the risk factors, how close is a good store to buy food, what are the different factors which in the community, if you look at the community as a whole, that make the community more poor or less poor, and how we can correct some of those deficiencies. So I appreciate your question, and when the Global Health Institute was set up, our motto was reduction of health disparities. And you cannot only think about the disparities in Africa or in China. We have to start at home.
Well, I'm going to thank Mike for an excellent answer, but I'm also going to thank you for an excellent question, because of course you've highlighted things we all understand are issues. The system of prestige and incentive in this country leads people to go into the higher and higher specializations while leaving ordinary care for ordinary people in extremely mediocre and uneven shape. And it's a systemic issue. We all understand it, but it certainly is an issue. But I heard you suggest something else that we know is true, which is that there is a lure of the exotic that can be attached to global health. And I'm happy when a Duke student works in the highlands of Guatemala, but you don't have to go to the highlands of Guatemala to find a challenge that needs addressing. When we created the Institute, we made very clear, we used the word global in global health instead of the word international, which really meant outside the U.S. And so the word global is meant to mean like starting one, in the next office and going all around the world and back and trying to link these problems together. But it certainly is a challenge. I would say in Duke Engage, we have been really pressing students to engage with domestic opportunities and not only with international ones. In the field of education, you've got a country where ever so many students go backward in their school skills in the space of the summer, and you've got all these kids who are in college who are looking for something useful to do. That's a problem and a solution that need to be put together in a way. I've got to go off. On the aisle.
Just to answer her question a little bit, I'm an obstetrician down in New York. And the reason I'm an obstetrician is I went to, as a student in the American Medical Association, I went to West Virginia, Wells, West Virginia. And the guy there was an obstetrician. He didn't do surgery. And Joe Rose said, this is a great eagle. And one other thing I was wanting to tell you up there is that if you could just get JCO is one, it's a $1 billion industry. Duke Hospital probably spends $1 million every couple of years just to get accredited.
Correct.
With very little patient benefit cost to implement ratio.
Well, I guess what I would say to that is that's one of the reasons why it's so important that in addition to medical school working in these fields, we have, our business school has 40% of our MBAs do some work in health sector management, and one of the principal strengths of our public policy school is in health sector policy, because you're going to need the convergence of this expertise in those areas to get these issues addressed.
And the reason I went into medicine, other than my girlfriend was a nurse, Haynes House, I didn't want to be
His office is in Haynes House.
And I didn't want to be an navigator by the time of the war, say astigmatism, is that one, you have to like doing medicine. Two, when people thank you for doing a good job, it far outweighs the bad times. You could be your own boss in the old days, and you can make a decent living or a very good living. The last two have been taken away from us with the HMOs and stuff. Family practice, they're 70–75% overhead. Like you're saying, it is hard to make a living in family practice. And a lot of it is the regulations. So I always try to, people in the ivory towers, which Duke is one of them, if they could just get the government and the regulations off their back. Electronic medical record is nice for collecting data, but you're going to get second-rate medicine because it's all boilerplate. You're not going to get a guy like House on TV that make your diagnosis. Of course, he bankrupted your hospital by all the tests and stuff. It's going to be a problem. Yeah. And the smart people, unfortunately, probably are not going to go into medicine in the future because they can, except for a recession at the moment, they can probably make it even more better job doing something else.
If you want to read an interesting book, there's a book by a person who teaches at Princeton named Paul Starr called The Social Transformation of American Medicine. It's basically a social history of the medical profession in which you can learn that medicine was a lower middle class profession in the 19th century, in the first half of the 19th century. It's a profession that has been all over the board, and we don't know what the future holds for us. I would say, if you take health seriously as a component of human wellness, you have to think how to structure the supply of expertise and the incentives that will lead people to get that expertise. And obviously we have a lot of ground to make up in this country, let alone elsewhere in the world. I saw a hand this way. I'm sorry, there it is right there.
I've talked a lot about structural sort of interventions in, I guess this is more like malaria, but can you give me a specific example of one which is very, very good or effective within the realm of HIV/AIDS?
Sure.
And how that kind of, what I have a hallmark of really effective intervention programs worldwide?
I think what we mean by structure, in the sense you raised, and I think, is the environment, the legal environment, the social environment that allows things to take place. And I think in the field of AIDS, one example is the needle exchange. If you want to, we know that needle exchange works dramatically to cut down HIV and injected drug users, but you need to create an environment where those who are unfortunately on drugs can get clean needles and syringes. You need to have a legal environment and policies that allow that to happen. And where that has happened, including in Seattle, there's been a dramatic drop in HIV in drug users. And that's a very simple example that one of the best. Not everyone believes this, unfortunately, and sometimes you can't use federal, right now in this country, you can't use federal funds for these programs, but thank goodness many cities and states have stepped up and used that money. Another good example in HIV is a project we have in India right now with sex workers. We have one of our faculty who spends a lot of time on a project there looking at how to make sex work safer. Now you could say, well, why not just abolish it? Well, it's not that simple, because women who are poor find that one way they can raise money. It doesn't mean we like it or condone it, but it's a reality. So rather than trying to abolish it and putting it underground, we have a project there that's looking at how to make it safer. What do I that making sex work safer can dramatically reduce HIV infection between sex workers and clients. And so those are two very good examples in the HIV field. In the non-HIV field, a very simple one is seat belt helmets. You know, the states that have laws that say if you're riding a motorcycle and you have to wear a helmet, have much less head injury than states that don't. And yet there are many states that don't have laws like that because people want to feel the freedom of riding their motorbike. Well, the price is a lot more head injury. That's a structural intervention in the sense that you're creating a law that doesn't give you a choice. So there, I think in health, and these are critical, and it's why I think it's not just medicine that's important, as the President has said. It's also important to think about the sociologist, the political scientist, the economist, the demographer, who understand society and understand how to think about these factors. And one of the really exciting things about the institutes, we have these working groups around our different research priorities, which I mentioned earlier, and these are really interdisciplinary. People thinking not only about personal behavior, but also about the environment and how to make that environment a better environment so that people can be healthier, enabling people to be healthier, which is really critical. And I could give you many, many more examples of that.
You know, there are going to be a lot more questions in this room, but here's the good thing. This guy's going to stick around downstairs, and everybody can come up and ask him anything. He'll come up and ask me anything. This was very fun for us. I'll tell you, it was very fun for me.
Produced by Duke University. Online at duke.edu.